In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about posing. So I'm Daniel Norton, photographer here in New York. I make videos like this. This one's going to be kind of philosophical, but kind of about technique. I make them about business. I make them about gear and stuff like that. So if you guys are interested, go ahead and subscribe. It is a beautiful fall day in New York, and I'm hanging out here. We might have to go inside soon, but we'll stay out on the porch as long as we can. In any case, so this kind of came to mind, although it's been in my list. I have this list that I keep when an idea pokes up for a while. But when I was talking about who is a model or whatever a couple videos back, there was a little bit of conversation, and then in other places I've had it as well, where people kind of mentioned, oh, but professional models or people that are more experienced, it's easy because they just kind of get there and they pose, and it makes it easier for a new photographer. You don't have to direct them. This type of thing. And then people that are less experienced, it's more work. You have to be able to pose them better. And it got me thinking that there's lots of different ways that we direct/pose our models. And what works for you, I guess, works for you, right? But I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that I like to do it, the way that I think is pretty common in the more kind of editorial portraiture, fashion kind of market, we'll say, versus what's popular, let's say, in the wedding/senior portraits, that kind of market, right? Not that these things don't overlap, but generally speaking. So if you were to Google, I didn't Google, but I suppose if you were to Google posing guide or posing book, you'll probably find a gazillion books about how to pose and videos about how to pose and turn your face this way and turn this way and do this with your hands and do this, blah, blah. Don't do that and turn this. Okay. My personal opinion, unless you're doing groups for weddings or something, throw that out the door. That creates standard, boring crap. In fact, I was just watching, this is totally funny. So it was a long way to get me there, but it popped up on YouTube, and there was, I think it was the first time that Eddie Murphy was on the Johnny Carson show, so it's like in the 80s, or early 80s, maybe late 70s. And he's talking about his suit, and he's like, yeah, people in catalogs, they're always wearing suits, so whenever I put my suit on, I'm always like, and that's exactly the way that I see those kind of poses. Whenever I get a comment, or I see people talking about, oh, you cut off part of their elbow, or this is cut off. Okay, move forward in time to where we are today. This is not 1950, this is not 1960, 1970. This is not the time for stale, boring, pose, stay perfectly still shots. There's a lot of reasons why that kind of stuff, people moved away from that kind of stuff. And one of them, in my opinion, is because photography itself became faster, right? I mean, you could look now and be like, well, digital, right? You can shoot a gazillion, trillion, zillion frames per second with the new Sony or whatever, and all that. But even just rolling back a bit, digital itself, even when it wasn't fast, was still allowed you to shoot more pictures because it was essentially free, right? 35 millimeter, when it became more and more common amongst professionals, again, gave you way more images than you had before. Even medium format compared to large format, When I first started shooting, most product photography was done on large format. We already were moving to, all the fashion stuff for the most part was done medium format, and then small inserts were done 35 millimeter. But now, I mean, as time progressed, only especially the smaller catalogs and smaller stuff, and magazines especially, they started taking 35 millimeter as their norm, So when I was shooting fashion for magazines, I almost always shot 35 millimeter. I think every once in a while I shot something square because I wanted to, but generally speaking, that's the way you did it. But what does this really mean in practice, right? So what does that have to do with posing, Daniel? What are you talking about? Well, the thing that changed was this. Instead of being able, let's say you had 10 frames to get the shot, or 8, you had 36, right? Which allowed photographers to do, at any budget. I mean, certainly higher end people, people that had bigger budgets were shooting tons of rolls of film, but when you had a smaller budget and you only had the budget for 2, 3 rolls of film, now you're looking at the difference between 30 shots and 100 shots. And that allowed you to do stuff that was a little bit trickier, a little bit harder, a little bit more finessed, have people move through the scene, have them go through an action, have them play out a scene. And this creates a much more naturalistic look. It's still a pose, right, in a sense, because you're still planning it. But when you have somebody and let's say you have a couple and they're sitting at a table at a cafe drinking coffee, right? If you have one 4x5 sheet to shoot, it might be that they're going to be like, Whereas if you're shooting with 35 millimeter, or you're shooting digital, obviously today, you can literally just have them having a conversation. And when you do, you'll get different types of poses that are more natural, and the whole thing feels more organic and more real. And I think that people like that. I know I like that, and clearly it's a style, right? This is very different than when you have a limited amount of frames that you want to shoot, and you have a certain amount of time to get it. So that's why I mentioned, like weddings especially, you're there, you're shooting a group of people, and then you have to do, of course, the whole family, then just the bride's side, then just the groom's side, then just these people. You want each frame, maybe you shoot a quick series or whatever, but you want each kind of pose to be good. What you're clicking multiple frames for is blinks and a little weird expression. So you want to be more precise with that. You want to be like, okay, hold on, you turn this way, you turn that way. You don't want to just have them do stuff. Probably with just the couple you do that. You do some posed ones and then you have them run around or whatever you're doing. And that's kind of a different style. Now, the reason why this all comes together into what I'm going to talk about is the comments like, well, with better models, they just do their thing and you can just shoot and they're posing. That is a bad way to look at it. And that's how you get, in my opinion, images that have no life. If you think that you can just take a model and put them in big open flat light, like sometimes you go out to a park or something, and just let them do their thing, and you just shoot, what you will get is the same pictures that everybody else gets because they're just doing the same thing. What you really want to do is have a conversation with the model and interact with them in a way that will get them to do the things that will create the images that you want to create. So there's a few different ways to do it. I'm going to kind of talk about those a little bit now. The first thing is, this will be more of a controlled studio space, is to always let your model understand the lighting. This is where digital is amazing, and of course shooting tethered is even better because you can literally show them the image when you get set up. Don't show them every image. I feel like stopping constantly is a problem. They'll start criticizing their posing. I don't recommend doing that, especially with a new model. But what you do want to do is shoot a couple and then show them what the light looks like. So that when you say, turn towards the light, they understand that. What you want to be is like, you can say, listen, the light's here, and if you turn this way, your face is going to be in the shadow. You can even shoot one to show them that. If you turn this way, you're going to have big shadows on your face. If you turn this way, you're going to have nice light across your whole face. So since this is a bright, sunny shot, whatever, we want smiles, work more this way so we get less shadow on your face, right? You start talking to them, and then that way they understand, right? You give them some basic ideas. Make sure you don't scrunch your chin up, that kind of stuff that's more common. And you give them all that up front. Not every single frame, turn this way, do that, do that. You give them a series of things to do, and then you let them work through it. This is how you get really kind of natural looking. And I use it a lot in headshots, especially where people feel very confined, especially actors who don't want to just pose, right? You just let them kind of be themselves, and you kind of give them some basic instruction and let them react. Okay, we're going to do something a little bit fun and flirty now, so close your eyes, get the shoulders back, get in a good body position, breathe, think of some, attractive, person that you might want to flirt with or whatever, and okay. And then they open their eyes and they're just like, whatever. And you're shooting, right? You watch somebody shooting that and you're just like, they're not having to do anything. The good model is just doing their thing. No, you establish that up front. You don't just let them walk on the set and do their thing. You have this conversation, you talk about the light, you talk about the idea, you talk about the feeling, right? And then you comment, you look at some together, of course, between things, and you comment about it. You're like, oh, this actually has a very sci-fi vibe. Let's really go that direction. Or you go, or as you're shooting, you can, again, they already know that's your light over there, right? You can be like, oh, you get too much shadow on your face, and they'll automatically know, oh, okay, right? Because now you've already had this conversation with them. You don't have to be like, turn your face to the left. Oh, a little bit more, a little bit less. That creates very stiff stuff, which, by the way, is fine for some things, right? If you're doing very particular beauty shots for makeup, yeah, that's different. You're going to be like, but generally speaking, keeping a loose idea of the pose is kind of how you direct. And it doesn't mean you're not directing the model. It doesn't mean you're not directing the model when you just don't move every single body part of them constantly. It means that you're doing it a different way, right? And so the other way that is very popular, this is usually more done in big open spaces or when you're further away from the model, is you will give them like a scene to play out. Like you might have your 200 millimeter lens and you might be like, okay, We want to do something where you're going to kind of run across the street and look back over your shoulder, like kind of that kind of classic fashion, kick your legs back, and then you kind of even run through it a couple times with them, maybe demonstrating it. You know, oh, you're going to be like this. You know, you're going to do this, and then you go back to your lens and you say, okay, do it, and they do their thing, and then they do it a couple times, and then maybe you go back up and you go, you know what though, when you run, turn your face back this way instead, and you go back and you shoot a few more. Again, you're not stopping them every single frame to do that. What you're doing is you're creating an action. The action is them going across the crosswalk, looking back over their shoulder, and that's basically where you're at. So this is kind of the scope, right? That's your direction. That's how you're doing it. Again, it's not so much posing, but it still falls into that category. It works the same way. It's for the same purpose as the pose. You're giving them an overall direction. Think of yourself, I often say, kind of like a movie director. You give them the stuff and then they step on the stage and they do their thing. The big difference as the photographer, of course, is that you can continuously throw direction out at them as they're doing it, because obviously the sound doesn't matter. And you definitely want to communicate. You don't want to be silent. You don't want to just be click, 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 and just they don't know what's going on, right? So again, you don't need to do the minutiae of posing them, but you do need to be like, oh yeah, that looks good. Yeah, a little more to the left. That stuff. That's going to allow them to understand that it's working and that you like what you're getting, but with small tricks and tips. And then always, always, always stop after a handful of frames and kind of start again. Because if you just, shoot blindly, and I see people do this. I mean, I've literally seen when we do open shoots where we have a model and the lighting set up and literally a person walks up, doesn't even say a word to the model and just picks up the camera and just starts shooting. It's like, yeah, granted, it's an open shoot and they kind of already have a basic setup they're in, but hello. And then I've seen other people just overdo it, in my opinion. We're like, okay, I'm going to have you do this and put your nose over here and do this. That's going to create a stiff image. You've got to find somewhere in the middle that works for you. That's really, really the key. So all that being said, how do you guys pose models? What do you think about this? And again, I always think of things as being collaborative. So I'm not saying that if you're a new photographer, hiring a professional model is a bad idea. I actually think it's a good idea, but you want to collaborate with them. In fact, most good models that, in my opinion, won't just get there and start posing. They'll actually talk to the photographer and be like, what kind of stuff are we going for? What are we trying to do? That way, again, when they sit down on the set, they should already have an idea, or stand on set or whatever, they should already have an idea of what they're posing, because you've already explained the lighting, you've already talked about the concept you're trying to produce, and then their job as the model is to interpret that with their body. But again, you can see them, they can't see themselves. No matter how good of a model they are, you're still going to have to give little bits of hints and stuff, especially when using flash, because they're not going to know necessarily where the light is unless they got a lot of experience with flash photography. In any case, let me know in the comments below what you guys do for posing. Are there posing techniques? Do you do little tricks that might work for other people? Let me know. I'm curious about that. If you have not already, go ahead and subscribe and ring the bell so you get the notifications. And I'll see you next time.